In this week's parsha, we have the laws of the yoledes, of the childbearing woman. The Torah tells us that in the case where she gave birth to a male child, she is impure for 7 days. And on the 8th day, imo b'sar alaso, the child is circumcised, receives his bris milah. Then for another 33 days, she's in a lesser state of impurity, and during that time she cannot go into the Beis HaMikdash, nor can she partake of the korbanos. If she gave birth to a female child, then the period is extended. The period of intense tumah is 14 days, and the period of lesser tumah is 66 days, for a total of 80 days, at the end of which she brings korbanos. These korbanos permit her to come into the Beis HaMikdash and partake of korbanos. The question that presents itself immediately is, why does the Torah insert the mitzvah of bris milah here? Because it's true that it happens to be that bris milah is on the day after she becomes pure. But bris milah l'chara has nothing to do with the laws of yoledes. The Gemara in Maseches Shabbos brings a drasha as follows. It says, Rav Ami, Kol she'imo tmeya leida. If the mother of the child has the impurity associated with childbirth, nimo l'shmeina, then the child is given a bris on the 8th day. Kol she'ein imo tmeya leida. If the mother does not have the impurity of childbirth, so for example, Rashi says, let's say a man, a Jewish man, had a child with a Gentile woman, and the Gentile woman gave birth to the child, in which case the mother isn't Jewish, so there's no tumas leida, so that child does not have to be circumcised on the 8th day. The child isn't Jewish, actually. If you convert the child, the bris can be postponed. Another example of this, the Gemara says, is the case of a yotze dofen. If a child is delivered by cesarean, in that case the mother is Jewish, but there's no tumas leida, because tumas leida, the impurity of childbirth, only comes with a natural birth. So in that case, since the mother is not tnei leida, the bris milah is not performed on the 8th day. The bris milah can be postponed. So the Gemara brings a question. For the Amalei Abaye said to Asi, Doros Rishonim Yochichu. You can bring proof from the earlier generations that there is no linkage between tumas leida and bris milah on the 8th day, because until the Torah was given, bris milah was practiced. Mr. Bris milah was given to Avraham Avinu, and it was practiced, and there was no tumas leida. There were no laws of impurity associated with childbirth. So you see, for many generations, there was no connection. Because children were circumcised on the 8th day, even though their mothers weren't Tumeya. So how could you say that now there's a connection? So Amrlei, sort of, Asi answered back, Mitna Torah v'neschatsha halacha. The Torah was given, and a new halacha was introduced. You're right. In the earlier generations, there was no such halacha. Children were circumcised on the 8th day, even though the mothers were not Tumeya. But once the Torah was given, there's a new halacha. From now on, from this point onward, the rule of milah b'shmeina is going to be linked to the tumas leida of the mother. Now this is perplexing on several accounts. First of all, what's the connection? Why should the circumcision of the child on the 8th day somehow be connected to the halacha that the mother is impure? And if there is such a linkage, how do we understand, in fact, that in the earlier generations that wasn't the case? Like, what is the nature of this mitna Torah v'neschatsha halacha? What changed with the giving of the Torah that until that point there was no connection between the impurity of the mother and the circumcision of the child, and somehow after the Torah was given, there's a new connection, and therefore the two are inseparable. Only in the case where the mother is Tameya is the child circumcised on the 8th day. This is something which has to be understood. Of course, in an overall sense, we have to understand what is the idea of tumas yoledes. What is the idea that a woman, a childbearing woman, should be impure, not allowed to go into the temple, not allowed to partake of sacrifices? Because why should such a halacha be the case? Like the begin pointing out that there seems to be a bit of a contradiction, perhaps a machlokas in Chazal, two places, as to why circumcision is performed on the 8th day. There's a Medrash Rabbah in Sefer Devarim, which says that this is a function of God's mercy. Because Baruch Hu had rachmanus on the child, that the bris should be delayed until he is physically stronger, better able to tolerate the surgery. And the Medrash goes on to say that just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu had mercy on the child, he has mercy on animals as well. As we know that when an animal is born, it can't be brought as a carbon, can't be slaughtered as a carbon until the 8th day. So the Medrash says that also is a function of compassion. Here it's a little harder to understand. When you slaughter an animal, the animal is not going to suffer for too long. So what difference does it make how old the animal is? What suffering are you sparing the animal from if you are slaughtering him as a carbon anyway? But this is what the Medrash says. That also is a function of God's compassion. So it seems that it's a very, very simple cheshbon. The newborn child is fairly weak. Bris Milah can be somewhat traumatic. So give him 8 days to become stronger, and he's better able to tolerate the Milah. That's what the Medrash Rabbah says on Sefer Devarim. In the Gemara in Maseches Nida, on Daf Lamed Aleph, we'll see the entire Gemara a little bit later, but the Gemara says an amazing thing. The Gemara says, why does the Torah say that Bris Milah is performed on the 8th day? So the Medrash says a surprising answer. It should not be that everyone is celebrating, as we know that a Bris Milah is really the greatest celebration in Jewish life. Little known fact, we don't think that way. We think that a wedding is the greatest celebration in Jewish life. It is very interesting, Gemara Masechah Shabbos. The Gemara Masechah Shabbos says that Tanya, Kol mitzvah shekiblu aleihem b'simcha, any mitzvah that Klal Yisrael accepted with joy, k'gein Milah, such as circumcision, D'chsiv, about which it says, Sos anochi alim rasecha, the pasuk in Tehillim says, I rejoice over your command. And Rashi explains this is a reference to Bris Milah. So we see that the initial acceptance of Bris Milah was with great joy. Adayin eis naisav simcha. We still perform it with joy. So hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years since the mitzvah of Milah was given, we still celebrate Milah with celebration. V'chol mitzvah shekiblu aleihem b'ktata, and any mitzvah which Jews accepted with resentment, k'gein arayas, such as the law of marriages. Well, we know, it says in the pasuk, Vayishma Moshe esam beichel mishbechaisav. Moshe heard the people crying by families. Al iske mishbechaisav, they were crying over the family relationships, the forbidden arayas. So adayin aisa b'ktata, it is still performed with contention. So since the laws of marriage were accepted with ketata, so marriages are still performed with ketata. In what sense? The leka ksuba l'rama v'tigba. There is no ksuba, there's no marriage contract which doesn't involve some contention, some fight. Now I heard recently an amazing story. The Avnei Nezer, Sachat Shabbat Rebbe, was the son of the Agudas Ezav, the Yala Rebbe, great yichas. He married the daughter of the Kotzker Rebbe. So at the time of the Chasna, so the custom was that the Chassan's parents supplied the Chassan with clothing, appropriate clothing for the Chasna. And the Kotzker came to the Chasna and he saw his son-in-law to be dressed like a king. And he started screaming at his mechutin. And he says, what are you doing? How do you dress him like that? You dress him up, he'll go to his head, he'll become conceited. And he made a whole to-do about the begadim that the chassan was wearing. So the Agudas Ezer was taken aback. Says, this is the customary practice here. What's the grievance? So he said, "Tired Mechutin, my dear Mechutin." Says, really, it's perfectly fine. But Chazal say there has to be some fight. And we haven't had a fight yet. Chazal say there has to be a fight. So I figured I'll make a fight over this, and with this will be Yaitse. This will discharge our obligation of having a fight. But it says here that really Bris Milah is a bigger celebration than the Chasna. Bris Milah, we accepted b'simcha, so we perform it with simcha. A wedding, because it was accepted with katata, we perform it with katata. So why is it that today a wedding is such a celebration? It's to mask the katata. There's so much stress, there's so much tension, so we bend over backwards, we hire a big orchestra, and we serve a lavish meal, and we dress up in order to mask over that tension. So the Bris Milah is a pure celebration. Bris Milah is absolute joy. So Bris Milah is a great celebration. So back to the Gemara Nida. The Gemara Nida says that if the Bris Milah would be performed while the mother is still in a state of impurity, it would be everyone is happy, and the father and mother are sad because they're forbidden to each other. And therefore the Torah said, delay the Bris Milah till the 8th day, then the Yoledes can go to the mikveh and she's permitted to her husband, and then everyone will be happy. That's what the Gemara says. Now this is an astounding Gemara. Like, that is the problem? I mean, it's hard to imagine. This is the bris, and it's the biggest celebration. Everyone is happy, and everyone is celebrating, and the father is upset because he's forbidden to his wife. It just seems incredible. It's interesting to know, we mentioned Rabbi Eliezer a moment ago, that Rabbi Eliezer has a tshuva in Yeridea, where he quotes this Gemara, and he says that the Gemara is inexplicable, and he brings from the Chidushei Arim, who said on this Gemara that there are soidas, there are secrets in this Gemara, and you only can understand this Gemara if you are privy to those tremendous secrets. And anybody who reads this Gemara simply becomes more corrupt, he says. Because you take it at face value, it seems incredible that the Torah delayed the bris because the father was going to be upset because he can't have relations with his wife. On face value, it's totally inexplicable. So he says that the real pshat is al pi soid. Okay, we have no entry to the olam hasoid, so we're going to have to understand the Gemara. But for a moment, let's just point out that here the Gemara introduces another aspect to why bris milah is on the 8th day. Not simply that the child should have strength, but in order that the father and mother should be reconciled. The truth is that it's not a contradiction. If you look carefully in the Lashon HaPsukim, in Parshas Lech Lecha, and in our Parsha, you find that this halacha that Milah is on the 8th day is expressed in two different ways. And it's really worth reflecting on. If you go back to Parshas Lech Lecha, when it talks about the mitzvah of Bris Milah being performed on the 8th day, the lashon of the pasuk is Uben shmeinas yomim yimoil lochem kol zohar. A child of 8 days old is circumcised. In other words, the pasuk is speaking about the age of the child. He's a ben shmeinas yomim. He's an 8-day-old child. That's when he receives his bris. The emphasis is on the age of the child. In our parsha, we're not talking about the age of the child at all. We're talking about the number of days from the birth. Now the pasuk says that when a woman gives birth, so she's impure for 7 days, and on the 8th day, the child gets a bris. Because we're not talking about the age of the child, we're talking about the amount of time which lapsed from the birth. We're not talking about something which is specific to the age of the child. Now, I don't know if there is a practical difference. I suspect there may be in the case of a person who crossed the international date line, perhaps. So you could have a situation where it is the 8th day from the bris, but 8 days did not lapse in terms of the child's age. That may be a possibility. But simply in Pshat and the Psukim, there seems to be a different emphasis. The answer is very simple. In Parshas Lech Lecha, the Pasuk is speaking about the consideration that the Medrash mentions, that the child should have enough strength to tolerate the bris. So there the consideration is ben shmeinas yomim. He has to be a child who is 8 days old. A child who has that level of development, that level of strength, he can have a bris. Before he reaches ben shmeinas yomim, before he's that age, he's too undeveloped to have a bris. That's why the Pasuk puts it this way. But Chazal understood from our parsha that our parsha is introducing a new consideration. Because here it isn't speaking about the age of the child as much as the 8th day of the mother's situation. Therefore Chazal understand that there's another consideration here. The consideration being that we want her to be pure before the bris is performed. And therefore, since she's Tameya for 7 days, the bris can't be done until the 8th day. That's the Gemara Maseches Nida. So really, it's not a contradiction. The Medrash is explaining the rationale behind the original halacha as given in Parshas Lech Lecha to Avram Avinu, and the Gemara is explaining the extra consideration which is introduced in our parsha. But we have to understand it. We have to understand, as we pointed out, it seems inexplicable that this should be the reason for the bris to be delayed. That the father is not going to be happy, he's not going to celebrate along with everyone else at this monumentous occasion because he's forbidden to his wife. The truth is this: if you look at the Gemara in Nida in context, you discover an amazing chiddush. A part of the Gemara is very, very familiar to everyone. But the entire Gemara is a chiddush. Listen to what the Gemara says. Shol Talmida v'Sibshim Yochai. The student asked Sibshim Yochai, Ne'ma Omer Torah Yoledes Mivia Karba. Why does the Torah say that a Yoledes, a woman who had a baby, has to bring a sacrifice? The Torah tells us she brings korbanos. Why is that? Amar Lehem, so he answered, Bisha Shekeiras Leilei, when she bends over to give birth, when she's in labor, Kaifetzes v'nishbas, she swears, Shlo Tizokek L'bayla, that she won't have relations with her husband. No more children, it's too painful. So she swears off. Lefikach Amar Torah, therefore the Torah says, Tavi Karban, she should bring a carbon. So it's to mechaper for this shvuah. So the Ramban explains in our parsha that really the shvuah is a shvuah shav. If a woman swears she won't have relations to her husband, the shvuah is not binding because a woman is meshubah to her husband. A woman is bound to her husband. She's obligated to her husband. Likewise, if a husband would swear that he wouldn't have relations with his wife, the shvuah also wouldn't be chal. Husbands and wives are mutually obligated to each other. So it's really a shvuah shav, and she needs a kapara. And therefore the kapara is the karbanos. Now this is the part of the Gemara that everyone knows. But let's pause for a moment and think. What is this Gemara telling us? This Gemara is telling us the rationale behind the korbanos. It's not telling us the rationale behind the days of impurity. Because why she's Tameya 7 days, 14 days for a boy, for a girl, and so on and so forth, that the Gemara L'chora is not addressing. The Gemara is only addressing the korbanos. Why are there korbanos? The korbanos are a kapara. But the tumah, the days of impurity, L'chora, the Gemara is not addressing. But then the Gemara continues. And the Gemara says, why is it that the days of impurity for a male are 7 and for a female are 14? Now we're discussing the tumah, not the korban. The tumah. Why is it that the Yoledas Zocher is Tameya 7 days and the Yoledas Nekeva is Tameya 14 days? So this is what the Gemara says. Zochar shakol smeichim bo, a male child where everybody celebrates. Why does everybody celebrate? Because there's a bris. Not because boys are better than girls, but because there's a bris. So mischaretas l'shiva. She only has remorse for 7 days. Nekeva shakol atzavim bo, a girl where everyone is sad because there's no bris. So mischaretas l'arba aser. So she has remorse for 14 days. So this is a tremendous chiddush. And this was a chiddush to me. That the Gemara is saying that not only are the karbanos related to her remorse, but the days of tumah are also related. Now, this woman, right, is mischaretas, right? She doesn't want to have relations with her husband anymore. So when does she get over that? Well, for a male, since there's celebration, she sees it's worthwhile. So after 7 days, she's reconciled. If the baby was a girl, she's not reconciled for 14 days. And that is an explanation of the Yemei HaTumah as well. What did the Yemei HaTumah have to do with her not being willing to have relations with her husband? And the answer is very pashut. Because we know in Chazal that there's a tremendous emphasis on the idea that the physical connection of a husband and a wife has to be a reflection of the emotional connection. In other words, if there is some contention, some pirud, some division between a husband and a wife, then it's not appropriate that they should be intimate physically. In other words, it's only appropriate if they are at peace with one another, where the affection is present, so then it's appropriate that they should be physically intimate. But otherwise, it's not appropriate. Chazal say that there could be terrible consequences for children who are conceived in that situation. The Gemara in the Darchei speaks of B'nai Teisha Midas, that there are 9 categories of children who are born with spiritual disadvantages, among them being B'nai Snua. If the father and mother are at odds, and they conceive a child together, that child is spiritually disadvantaged. And this is a theme which is expressed in Chazal in several places. Because here you have such a situation. You have a situation where there's a period, there's a separation. Right? Because of the woman's very difficult experience, she's gone through a difficult labor, she's given birth to a child, and she says no more. She's not interested in being with her husband anymore. The husband, on the other hand, he's ready, because he hasn't had that same experience. He hasn't gone through labor. You know, as much as the husband says, I know exactly how you feel, he has no clue. He has no idea what his wife experienced. So at this point, there's a period. It says, until that period is overcome, until there is a reconciliation, the Torah says they're forbidden to each other. In other words, it's not just the karbonos that are because of the oath this woman takes. The separation, the impurity, the separation is for the same reason. The Torah says they cannot be together until this couple is reconciled. It says after the woman overcomes that discomfort, and now she's on the same page as her husband, so to speak, then the Torah permits them again. How long does that take? The Gemara says, for a Zohar, since there's a lot of celebration, there's a bris, so on and so forth. So after 7 days, she already puts behind her thoughts of never having any more children. In the case of Nekeva, it takes a week longer. But the point is, that's what the Torah says. The reason they are prohibited to each other is also because of this psychological period that has taken place. This to me was a tremendous chiddush. I never thought about it, but that's what the Gemara seems to be saying. Now the truth is, that's only half the picture. Because we know that the Tumas Yoledes is not only an Isser, that the husband and wife are forbidden to each other. In other words, it's a full-blown Tumah, which has consequences for the Beis HaMikdash as well. You can't go into the Beis HaMikdash, and you can't eat kachim. Now how do you understand that? But it's really the same thing. In other words, what does it mean to be an Eved Hashem? To be an Eved Hashem, to be able to go into the Beis HaMikdash, to partake of korbanos, is you have to be devoted to your mission in life. In other words, if a woman who can have children swears, no more, I'm not going to have any children, right? Essentially she's saying, I'm not willing to do that which I was put on this world to do. It's not only she has to be separated from her husband, she has to be separated from the Beis HaMikdash as well. In other words, she's not psychologically in that place where she can present herself as a servant of the Ribono Shel Olam in the Beis HaMikdash. When she overcomes, and Chazal say, "Ein adam nitfas b'tzara," no person is blameworthy for their pain. But until she overcomes that pain and is reconciled to her mission, she's estranged not only from her husband, she's estranged from the Beis HaMikdash as well. So when she overcomes that, in the case of a Zochar, after 7 days, 14 days, then already she's restored to her state of Tahara. This is an amazing thing. Then the Gemara continues and says, why is the bris on the 8th day? And the Gemara says, because until then the parents will be sad. And now on the 8th day the parents will be happy. So I think the pshat is pashut. It's not they are sad because they cannot have sexual relations. They are sad for the reason that the Torah forbade them from having relations. In other words, they are sad because they understand that there is a piyud. They understand that there's a wedge. That's why the Torah says they're usher to each other. They understand that they're, in some sense, they are not reconciled. That's what's sad. It's not physically they can't be intimate. That's not the issue. The issue is, but the Torah says they can't be intimate. Why? Because they are psychologically estranged from each other in some sense. That's the thing which is very sad. So therefore, the Chazal said, better that the bris milah should be delayed so that the parents could also celebrate wholeheartedly. So I think that, I don't think this is a side, but I think that probably is the kavanah of the Gemara. And to take it a step further, I think there's another aspect to this, which Chazal don't say, but I don't think it's far off. The bris milah is the beginning of the child's upbringing as a Jew. It is the first Jewish ritual that is done upon the child. Because until then, he's treated as a generic baby. But the first Jewish thing done for the child is really bris milah. And then ultimately, there are other things. If it's a Bukhar, Pidyon Ben, later teaching him Torah, and so on and so forth. Bris milah is really the beginning of the parents raising the child as a Jew. We know there's an idea which Chazal express that it's very important in the chinuch of a child, in the upbringing of a child, that parents be on the same page. Because if there is some contention, some wedge between the parents, that will have an impact on the efficiency of their child rearing. So that's also part of the kavanah. When the Torah says that we want the father and mother to be happy before the bris, but it's not just that the father and mother will be happy. It's that if the father and mother are happy, if they are reconciled with each other, then they will be effective in their parenting of the child. Because if there is some wedge between them, then they are that much less effective as parents, as mechanchim of this young child. And therefore the Torah felt it's very, very important that the bris should be performed on the day of reconciliation. It's not during the 7 days of separation, but on the 8th day, which is the day of reconciliation. That's why it's very, very important. And I would say that that really is the additional consideration that the Torah is meisif here with Tumas Yoledes. Meaning that even before Matan Torah, there was the other consideration, right? Which is that the baby should have enough strength. So Ben Shmai Nasgam, the pasuk says, the baby should be an 8-day-old baby, and he can tolerate the bris milah. Then you perform the bris milah. With the giving of the Torah, something changed. That there's a new consideration over here, which is that since the bris is the child's initiation into his training as a Jew, the parents have to be reconciled. The parents have to be on the same page. The parents have to be one, and therefore the bris milah is delayed until after the days of Tumah, until the 8th day. And this is such an important consideration that once the Torah was given, it becomes the overriding consideration. This is the reason. Almost as if the first cheshbon somehow disappears. We're not worried anymore about the strength of the baby. There's a much more important consideration, which is that father and mother have to understand that they have to be reconciled. They have to work together to raise the child. And symbolically, the Torah brings that out by saying that the bris milah is on the first day that father and mother become committed to each other. What happens if father and mother were not forbidden to each other? Because there was no tumas leida, then the whole halacha doesn't apply. The whole halacha, because then there's no symbolism in the bris being on the 8th day. The whole symbolism of the bris being on the 8th day is because the 8th day is the day of reconciliation of father and mother. So, but if there's no reconciliation on the 8th day because there was no separation on the previous days, then the whole halacha doesn't apply. And that's nitna Torah v'neschatcha halacha. The question is, why did that change with Matan Torah? Even before Matan Torah, Avraham Avinu also was a mechanech of his children. Because why is this halacha only neschadish with the Torah? So I want to point out a conjecture, just an interesting ha'ara, based on a shita that the Ramban brings in Parshas Emor. In Parshas Emor, there is the parsha of the Makalel, the Jew who cursed the Ribono Shel Olam. And the pasuk says a very interesting thing. The pasuk says that this was a consequence of a fight of two people. The one who cursed Hashem was Ben Isha Yisraelis. He was the son of a Jewish woman, and his opponent was a Ish Yisraeli, a Jewish man. So it's very odd that the opponent is called a Jewish man, and he's not called a Jewish man, he's called the son of a Jewish woman. And the Ramban brings a medrash that he was a convert. He was converted. So why was there need for conversion? His mother was Jewish. So the Ramban brings a shita from the Tzarfate, from the French Rishonim, that say an amazing thing. That say that this halacha, that the status of a child is determined by his mother, was only after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, status was confirmed by the father. Now this is a very interesting thing. There's a misconception we have. We all think that Judaism says the most important thing is the mother. The reality is the opposite. As a rule, status is conferred by the father. So for example, whether a child is a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael, doesn't depend on the mother, it depends on the father. When we had the divisions of Shvatim, which Shevet you belong to, the Mishpachaisim Uveis Avaisim, depended on the father. Bu'umais, halacha achar hazachar, where you have different halacha that apply to members of different nations. So for example, a ger from Ammon Umayav can never join the fold. A ger from Mitzrayim and Edom can join after 3 generations. Other gerim can join Klal Yisrael immediately. So what's the halacha of the offspring of a mixed marriage? Who confers status on the child, the father or the mother? The Gemara says, "Bu'umas halacha achar hazachar," that when it comes to a question of nationality, that's conferred by the father, national status. There's one exception to that rule. Now this exception happens to be the most common shiloh that comes up, but it's really the anomaly, which is that if the one parent is Jewish and the other parent is not, then status is conferred by the mother. That's the anomaly. Right? But as a rule, status is conferred by the father. Says the Ramban in the name of Tzarfatim that this anomaly is only after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, status was always conferred by the father. And therefore, since this person was born before Matan Torah, I mean the story takes place after Matan Torah, but he was born before Matan Torah, so the Ben Ish Yisraeli, this person was Ben Ish Yisraelis, was the son of a Jewish woman, but the father was an Egyptian, needed conversion. He wasn't considered a Jew. So his opponent is an Ish Yisraeli, was a Jewish man, was a full-fledged Jew. But he was only a Ben Ish Yisraelis. He was the son of a Jewish woman, but he wasn't Jewish. Because before Matan Torah, status was conferred by the father. This is an amazing, amazing thing. So my conjecture is this, that before Matan Torah, the role of a mother was not the same as after Matan Torah. It says before Matan Torah, where status was conferred by the father was the sole mechanech of the child. And therefore, it was the father's obligation to transmit values, to instruct, to teach, and so on and so forth. The idea of a connection to the mother, that was neschadesh with Matan Torah. So after Matan Torah, you have two parents. Now you have a father and a mother. And therefore, the whole halacha that the Mila B'Shmaina is tolui and Tumas Leida can only be after Matan Torah, because it has to do with the mother's involvement in the bringing of the child. Right? She has to be reconciled with the father before the chinuch of the child can begin. That's because the mother plays an active role. But before Matan Torah, where everything was conferred by the father, status was conferred by the father without any exceptions. The father was, in a sense, the exclusive parent, so therefore it wasn't a consideration b'chlal. But nitme Torah v'neschat shalacha. Once the Torah was given, and mothers took on a more important role, therefore it was absolutely imperative that there be a reconciliation between the mother and the father before the bris milah, and therefore it's pushed off to the 8th day. But upon him, this is a very, very important lesson. The kitzur of what we're saying is that this is the meaning of the psukim in our parsha. That our parsha says that because there is a pirud, a separation, a polarization, if you will, from the father and the mother, that is why the Torah says they must be separated for 7 days. Right? They cannot be physically intimate because they become estranged. Right? The mother wants certain things, the father wants other things, and they're not in sync with each other. Therefore, the Torah says they can't be together. The 8th day is the day of reconciliation. That is the day of the bris. That is the day that the child begins his formal induction to Klal Yisrael, because now he has two parents that can work together to raise him. And of course, where Chazal hint this, many the Mefarshim explain the famous Gemara in Sanhedrin, that it says regarding the Ben Sorah Umara, that the rebellious son who was ultimately executed, the Torah says that he's a Ben Sorah Umara because Eneno Shomea B'Kol Av B'Kol Imo, doesn't listen to the voice of his father and mother. So the Gemara says a very surprising drasha, which is that the law of Ben Sorah Umara only applies if the father and mother have the same voice. Now this is very unusual, because generally a female voice is higher than a male voice. A male voice is a baritone, and a female voice is a soprano. It's a much higher pitched voice. The Torah says no, that the law of Ben Sorah Umara only applies if the pitch of the two voices is exactly the same, which is hard to understand at first glance. So Balei Drush explained Pshat in the Gemara that the Ben Sorah Umara is only held responsible, says, if his chinuch was perfect. If there was a flaw in his upbringing, we can't blame him. We can't hold him responsible, because it's a consequence of the parentage. If the parents don't have the same voice, I'm not talking about the pitch of their voice, that's not the issue. If they don't speak in the same voice, if the father says one thing, the mother says something else, they have different values, they have different approaches, they're not on the same page, so then how could you blame the child for turning out not in the optimal way? So of course, it's going to be a consequence of that type of chinuch. If the parents speak with one voice, then you can hold the child responsible. There's no flaw in his upbringing. There's something that is amiss with him, so he can be held responsible. But this is the idea that parenting requires harmony. It requires agreement. It requires consensus. And that's the remez in this parsha, as it comes out from the Gemara in Nida, that those first 7 days where there's some antagonism. And by the way, it's interesting to know that it's not only because of this question of whether they want to have many other children. I think this is a phenomenon which is well documented, that husbands feel very much neglected after the birth of their children, because the mothers are so focused on the little baby who needs so much attention and so much caring for, and the husband feels that he's left out in the cold. So it's a very stressful time, this period. That isn't the time that the child's chinuch can begin. Right? If it's a time of division between the parents, everything has to be delayed. So Chazal say that in the case of a zohar, so since there's a celebration and everyone's in a good mood, so the mother is also reconciled. So therefore, after 7 days, it's enough. So therefore, the day of reconciliation with the 8th day, that's the day of the bris. It's a tremendous, tremendous thought we have to understand, and it's relevant even those of us whose children are not really infants. There's the idea that parents have to be in agreement, consensus, and think alike, and reconcile their differences. If there is strife in the house, if there's tension in the house, the consequence for the children is going to be something which is horrific. Right? Where there is agreement and consensus, then there is half a chance for hatzlacha in their upbringing.